Hello everyone, welcome back to Hydra Book Reading Club. And finally, I promised this will be the last video about modulation. We have looked at how modulation works with P5JS, not with Hydra, how to just to illustrate how pixels are shifted around. And then we went through modulate, which uses red and green channels of the modulator function. And we also looked into modulate scale, modulate rotate, and today I'm going to cover modulate pixelate. And I really promise that this is going to be the last video about Hydra book modulate chapter. And again, there are other modulate functions, but they are a little bit too similar to modulate itself, and I found it's like not worth covering. But this one, modulate pixelate, can be very interesting if you do it right. It's very tricky also to use, so that's why I think it's worth like one video to cover it. Um, and just like the other ones, the modulate and modulate scale, it's going to use red and green channel. So let's just dive into it. And this is the example sketch from Flor. Yeah, she uses actually modulate rotate in here, which is quite interesting. Okay, I'll just minimize myself. Let's clear the sketch. And yeah, so I just looked into what I wrote in Hydrobook, so I wrote it, but it's a little bit underwhelming, the examples, so I'm gonna just do it something differently, and one day if I decide to revise a Hydra book, then I will probably give these examples in this web page book version as well. But in this video, I'll just do it casually. So what I'm gonna do is, but I think it's a good idea to kind of blur this or pixelate this noise texture. So I'll just, this is quite arbitrary, and I'll just make the movement like completely stopped because I mean, it's just a decision, but if things are moving, it's kind of distracting. Sometimes you don't get what is happening. Um, so I'll do it like this. And just to illustrate what pixelate is, I mean, you probably know what pixelate is at this point if you're watching this video. If you don't, then please go through. I think already in the beginner's tutorial video series, like one of the first episodes, I think I covered pixelate. You can, so just like very basic stuff, you can do it without any parameters here, right? And I think the default is, I forgot, 1616 or something? A little bit finer, so something like this. Or maybe, is it? No, maybe 2020. Yeah, so the default value is 2020. Of course, you can go to Hydra API page and check what the default parameters are. I was just guessing, and sometimes I like to do this kind of stuff. Yeah, so that's that. And if you make it finer, I think I covered this in the last video just before. If you make it like super big, then it's actually not pixelating enough. Well, pixelating at all, almost. And with your eyes. So this is like original texture, and if you start to kind of make it smaller number, then you start to see this granularity or the pixelation of the texture. And it doesn't have to be, this is also super interesting part, that it doesn't have to be like same value for X and Y. So for example, if you just pick one or choose the number 1 for the first value, and the second value is like big, then just like in the last video, it will just stretch it, just like scaling effect happens. And of course you can do like a bit of pixelation here, that's also possible. So basically now what's happening is like 10 rows, yeah, in one column. So it's like a matrix, right? So it's 1 is like the number of columns, 10 is number of rows if you want to see it. So it's almost like, you know, we're painting the Excel sheet. So if it's like this, then, well, it's a little bit dark. I'll just change it a little bit so that you can see it. So 1 column, 2 column, and 10 rows. That you can also see it that way as well. So this is pixelate, and we know it, but I just wanted to give you an example of like what we're going to do, because it's very important to know like what is interesting parameter as pixelate. One is like these very small numbers, like 1 or 2, that really gives like stretched effect. Of course you can do like 4, but this still has this like Excel sheet kind of effect, right? And what I think is also interesting is bigger number, that, oh, this is actually something new, that is big number, and this time it's not 1, like stretched 1, but if it's like 10, then you start to see this kind of like strips. So there are like 10 strips of noise, and each one has kind of different oscillation, because it's noise, it's not OSC, so it has like different patterns, noisy patterns, but then it's like 10 strips, like, yeah, strips, like you can see like it's like a masking tape or whatever, ribbons or whatever. So this is also something you can do. So this like small number, super big number, and this like combination can lead to like very different kind of pixelation. So pixelate sounds like it's always something like this, but it's actually not. And that's something important to know when we start to use modulatePixelate. Now, what modulatePixelate does is basically we're going to use this modulator function to set these numbers that we just explored. Basically, it's red and green channel of this modulator function, but it's very tricky to use, because if you just like put OSC and I don't know, 10, 0, let's keep it static. Does it look like pixelation? It's like yes and no. It has this like blocky kind of pixelated texture to it, but also like there's like curvature, and it doesn't feel really like it's pixelating so much. By the way, you can also add red and green channel like shifted with this sync parameter of OSC, but it doesn't really change the fact that it's like kind of this curved. If this is what you want to use, like that's perfect. I'm nothing against it, but then I feel like there's something like needed to push it a little bit further. And in that way, in that sense, like I think we have already explored this trick, especially in this modulate rotate, the video before. But basically, what happens if you do pixelate 1, 1 of the modulator function? So for example, this here. If I add the speed to it, what happens here is this is like basically sine wave. Well, the intensity is like going up and down with the sine wave kind of oscillation. So it like goes up to 1 and goes 0, 1, 0, 1, 0. And across the screen, all the pixels have the same intensity, red and green and blue. So why am I doing this? Because now it's like a very easy way to, well, maybe I can slow it down a bit. It's a very easy way to kind of simplify things, and from here we can add more things just to observe the effect before we introduce the chaos. That's the idea. So what happens here? It doesn't look like it's changing the pixelation so much, but it is actually kind of having this weird scaling effect. Essentially what it's doing here is, just like I was in the modulate rotate video, I was explaining with this arrow function. In that case, it was like rotate and then using this function. But basically here, I want to do the same thing with pixelate. And because Hydra doesn't have a sine function, it's math sine. It's the default JavaScript function. And time, that's it. But in this case, we want to have second parameter because we want to move pixelate X and Y direction at the same time. Let's just run it. It's flickering, sorry. One of the problems here is that I didn't add times 0.5 plus 0.5 to kind of normalize it, because math sign gives -1 to -1 to 1. This probably will help a little bit, and let's see, but it's still flickering. I don't know why exactly what is doing. Then we can go to the API page, because I think what's happening here is that modulatePixelate has already some kind of default parameter. Yes, here. So it's multiple 10 offset 3, which means that, so this is default parameter, multiple 10 offset 3, which is quite arbitrary, I think. But basically, it's kind of like times 10, like giving times 10 to whatever texture, the modulator texture, and then baseline is like offset by 3. So because if you do pixelate 0, that's gonna like just like what we saw, like it will go like really crazy. So Oliver gave this kind of parameter that will not go crazy, basically. And to do the same effect, I can do times 10 plus 3. So this is basically what these parameters mean. So it will multiply by 10 and plus 3. I'll do the same. So I'll just like copy and paste this one and put it in here. And oops, I copied it instead of pasting. It's okay. It happens all the time. Okay. So, and I didn't put this here, and let's see how it goes. So now we have almost, I think the frequency is a little bit different because I didn't really pay attention to the frequency part, but I get the idea that it goes like squished, come back, squished, come back. I'll just keep this snippet somewhere down below so that it may be interesting to refer to it later for the record. So, but what I'm trying to do here is not about using this, and not even about having this kind of scaling effect. That's not really interesting as modulatePixelate. It's also like it's pixelating, but like what I wish is, for example, like to have something like switching between non-pixelated and pixelated. And when we talk about non-pixelated, we know that if we multiply by a big number, let's say like this, then it will not be pixelated at all, like visually. But yet if this thing, so this is 1, then there's no pixelation because it's going to end up with big number. And if this part is 0, then it will end up with 3. And actually I might want just like 4, I don't know, 16 maybe, so that it feels like, oh, there's pixelation. But then if the sign goes up, it will not pixelate anymore. So let's see what's going to happen with like this, like without modulatePixelate yet. So this is kind of interesting. There was like little moment that was, yeah, this like kind of comes back in and out, and there's like little moment. It was, yeah, like here it was pixelated. I wish this little pixelated moment stays longer. That's a tricky part. Like you have to adjust the parameter. Yeah, this is maybe a little bit better. But then now we're not like seeing this like scaling effect, but we see that, okay, this whole texture is like pixelated and comes back. And this is quite lengthy, but we just like change the parameter. So what essentially we can do is basically using the same line, but saying that it's 1000, 16. It's the same thing, right? That's how we verified it. And if we run it, actually, it does the same effect. And what is actually easier in this case is that, for example, I can add thresholding. Why thresholding? Because I feel like I want to have like more like kind of two separate states. One is like this really pixelated moment and non-pixelated moment, because right now it's like goes back and forth, but this pixelated moment stays a bit too short. So for example, I can do thresh, and this is the parameter you can really adjust, like to kind of balance which pixelated or non-pixelated moment to be longer. But I'll just keep it fair with 0.5. This would work. This will just like pop in and out, right? And what can be really interesting is to use the second parameter, which is by default, well, now I have this, so I'll check the default parameter of thresh, should be the color here. It is 0.04, so it's quite harsh. It's quite like close to 0, so that's why it's really harsh, and 0 is like harshest one, harshest change. But if you relax it a little bit, like 0.1 for example, then okay, it was still abrupt, but then 0.2 maybe, you can still see that it's kind of like going, it's like easing if you use like JavaScript animations, or not JavaScript, but any kind of like motion graphics animation and stuff, you probably know easing. If you don't know it, it's kind of like snaps to one side, one state, snaps to another value, but there is kind of transition. It's not like binary 0, 1, 0, 1, but there's like transition between it, and you can really adjust it by tweaking this parameter. So this is the kind of thing that starts to get interesting. So, but still we're not unlocking the whole like power of modulatePixelate, because for example, what if we do pixelate 2, 1? And this gets very interesting because now the two parts of the screen are pixelated individually. And this is like, you could use like mask and layer and so on to have like two separate pixelation with this whole arrow function and so on. You can do it by nesting them or like layering them. That's totally possible. But this gives like really like a freedom for you to make this like separate screens. And also like if you go for like pixelate 4:1, then this 4 parts of the screen are separately pixelated. And that's really, I think it's really difficult to do it if you start like nest or layer different textures, because now you have to do it 4 times, and Pixelate has to, this arrow function have to have like different phases and so on, and that's quite like, well, I mean, it's totally doable, but it will end up with like a huge amount of code, which you can do in this quite concise way, although it's quite cryptic. But what I really suggest is that you have this kind of pattern of like 1,000 or something like, or it can be 2,000, something like big enough for your screen, like ideally bigger than the screen size, the resolution, so that it will not affect at all, or can be the exact same resolution of your screen, so that pixelation basically goes to the pixel, so there is no pixelation. Anyways, but I'm quite like easy about these parameters, so just like whatever works. And the second one, or the third one, like modulator multiply offset. So the third one is kind of the pixelation you want. So if it's 4, then you want, well, we had 16, right? So it's like dividing by, these boxes are dividing by 16 across the screen. So now we have this like 4 separate corridors. So you see like 4 pixels inside the corridor, but you have 4 corridors, so it's actually 16 by 16. These parameters go to both x and y. So if you want to control x and y separately, then you have to do some weird things. It's not impossible, but it will take some time to, like do math. I mean, not that you have to learn something. It's just that for me also, it just takes time to develop it, because you kind of have to like hack and kind of understand what is happening behind the scene, and you might need to do some calculation by hand or whatever. But if you just like want to do like x and y uniformly pixelating, then this would work. Just say that x and y separately. For example, like if you do color 1, 0, then what's going to happen is that, just like we saw before, these strips are there, and these corridors are like further pixelating these strips in a x direction. Whatever, I don't know if that's clear enough, but that's not so important here. I just want to demonstrate that, again, just like modulate or modulate scale, these x and y comes from red and green channel of the modulator function. So let's have some fun because I know this is like a lot of talking. um, for example, like, I use OSC, but you can of course use like noise or something that will give a little bit more like random kind of effect. Also, it doesn't have to be 4:1, but 4:4. Then you can have like 4:4 screen that are like kind of pixelated individually. And now the behavior is a little bit different because what's happening with noise is that noise comes from -1 to 1. Well, output -1 to 1, and OSC or other functions output from 0 to 1. So to pair noise with thresholding, you might want to adjust the thresholding value like this, for example, to kind of have the halfway of noise, which is 0 instead of 0.5, because noise is -1 to 1. So they're like these like little bits and pieces that are like very confusing, and that's why like I feel always like working with modulate scale, modulatePixelate is very tricky because there's so many implicit things happening inside, and if you understand it, it's like super fun. Still, it's can be very confusing, but you can of course start with something, this kind of like pattern that you can use, or I don't know, -0.5 for example. So now it's like towards the negative value of noise. So sometimes some parts are pixelated, and of course, like it doesn't have to be 4:4. What happens if we do like 16:16, which it's not the random number I chose, but this corresponds to this one. So this kind of like pixelates. So when it's like pixelated, let's see if I can demonstrate it better. So we had this corridor, but now this corridor is like a little block that corresponds to the granularity of pixelation. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but just like putting this number, the same number here and there, you can really start to see. And I think that's what I really wanted to do in this example here, I think. Yeah, pixelate 16:16, and yeah, modulatePixelate baseline is 16. So this kind of thing I want to do, and I think it's just about adding movement here. Yeah, I think it's the same thing, although I didn't do thresholding, so it's kind of like flickering and still like, is it actually pixelate or not? It's not so clear, but adding the thresh really makes a difference. So I would say like this is kind of the like how to say, recipe or repertoire that I would actually come back often to. And from here, of course, you can change it to, I don't know, you like Voronoi or some kind of texture that you created, and it can be Voronoi, but coloring the OSC or whatever that you want to use. Something like this can be also possible. So it's like colorful Voronoi that's modulate pixelated by pixelated and thresholded noise. But this part really is something you can decide, and it can be like noise that's moving. I think a bit low frequency noise is better, or even more, like in the example, like noise 3. Now I kept it moving. But yeah, like, so this part, I would say like you can use this as some kind of pattern, and then you can break it, or you can replace noise with like OSC or something that would be appealing to you. This is also kind of interesting. It's like this pixelation that's moving gradually towards left. So I'll keep this code, and maybe I'll just comment this out completely so that it's not confusing. But yeah, so I will copy this in the description down below, so you can just go there, and if you feel lazy to like write it down, although I really recommend when you watch these tutorials just to write it by yourself. That helps really like understanding with muscle memory and so on. But if you just want to like try it out, you can just like go in the link down below and also start changing things. And I hope you have fun, and I'm glad that this is the end of the modulate chapter, and I will go to the further, what are they, colors, layers, but I think that's kind of like a lighter weight. So I think the motion is a little bit like kind of can get nerdy again, but I think this modulate unit was kind of the heaviest one. And if you have questions or what was easy for you to understand, what was not easy for you to understand, what are still like the questions you have, problems you encountered, please let me know in the comment down below. So hopefully I can answer to you. And if you create sketches, please share it also in the comment or in this community of like on Discord or Facebook and so on, so that we can share our knowledge and inspire each other. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. Bye.